All right, guys, we're creating a brand new ASP.NET Core web app, giving it a name. I'm going to not choose create individual accounts because we're going to add it a little bit differently, okay? Just because I want to fulfill the needs of what I think most of viewers want in this case, which is to be adding identity to an existing .NET 6 project where maybe you've already got Entity Framework going, but a lot of this stuff could be used regardless. So check this out. Authentication type none, create. Go down to your package manager console, and I know you could do all this stuff with PowerShell. So if you prefer to do it that way, the command might be just slightly different, but does the exact same thing. Install-package Microsoft Entity Framework core.tools. Okay? If you already had it installed, do update-package. Same thing. Now we're going to do install-package Microsoft.Entity Framework core.SQL Server. Excellent. Now go on over to your SQL Server or your SQL Express or whatever you might be using and see make sure that the database that you want is there, that just already has your application data, or you could create one if you're building a new app. Now I want you to pay attention to how you connect to this database. So in my case, I put this desktop, SQL Express, etc. We're going to put that into a connection string and get this going. So get back to Visual Studio, and I got a new command for you. See if I can make that a little bigger. So we're going to do scaffold-dbcontext, give it a space, quotes, server equal to, and then here's the exact same connection string from SSMS there. Then database equal, in my case I got that Microsoft example database Northwind. Mine's slightly modified. I've added a couple of test tables for other videos, but nothing that impacts this. You're going to put Microsoft Entity Framework Core SQL Server that you've already installed here, and then either -o or -output dir, give it a space, and whatever the folder name you want to create to put your models and your context file in that it's going to create for you. Then press enter. Now we're going to do add new scaffolded item. Right click on the project, go to add, new scaffolded item. We're going to pick all our identity stuff here now. Click on identity and click add. It's going to take a few minutes, especially if you haven't done it in your version of Visual Studio lately, for it to pull down everything. Then it's going to pop up with a dialog asking you which Razor pages you want. Okay? If you're not doing Razor backend, then you probably don't need this step. Instead, you'll be putting just telling what kind of identity pieces you want to bring in directly in your program.cs. If you're going to use the Razor Pages class library to give you all those screens that are pre-made up of logging in and forgot my password and that kind of stuff, this is the place to do it. If you don't have a data context already created, go ahead and hit plus. And I know we created one when we scaffolded our application, but we're going to inherit that one from this one. So you want to create an identity context right here and now. And click add. Excellent. Now hit add. This next step's very important. So over here in your database, we pointed out that you had the Northwind, right? Now we're about to add identity. So unless you want identity to be in a different database and maintain a different DB context, in other words, not be able to join between users and Northwind very easily, then you're going to want to pay attention to the app settings.json. So go to app settings.json and go down to the identity connection that it's put in here and make sure that this matches the previous one where your application data is. So in my case, it came up with something new. So I'm going to change it right away. Okay. So I've got server equal to desktop, blah, 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 database equal David's identity. That is the name of this application. Let's change that to Northwind instead, because that's what we have in the database. It's underlined in green. It says invalid escape sequence. That's because this new one has a slash. Just add an extra slash. Fix that. Make sure your database name matches and your server name matches. It's a mistake I made previously where I fixed one but not the other. All right, move on. So you've got in areas identity data, you've got the identity context, but in your models, there is another context folder, the original one that we got. So we want to inherit from identity here. So I'll get the name of this context class, which is DataVid's identity context. And then in your Northwind or whatever your application context class name is, we're going to inherit that instead of from dbcontext, from the DataVid's identity context. I'm going to do control that and do using DataVid's identity data just to bring in that namespace from the other part of the project. You'll notice a couple things went highlighted in red. You don't need the empty constructor right now, so just delete that. The constructor that complains about the base options is just saying that it's not a Northwind context in the base class, it's a DataVid's identity context. Don't change this. That could cause issues if you try to automatically create your identity database based on the code. I know that's code first and you might want database first, but just bear with me because you might want to initially create that so at least you have those tables to use. So I'm going to go ahead and hit F12 on this, and I'm going to add another constructor here, one that's a little bit more generic. So here we're going to add a protected, not public, so that it will only pick the public one if you can't find this, which we want it to do. And the rest of this, let's just copy for now. And then I said a little bit more generic. Let's say we want to accept any DB context options types, not specifically this. That should handle that. Save all. So now if I go back to my Northwind context, it's no longer complaining about this. All right, so not your Northwind context, but your DataVid's identity context, or whatever your identity context is called. Put that in your clipboard because we're going to add migration initial. And initial just means it's the first one, obviously. And we're going to specify that the context that we want to use is the identity, not your application data. Here it goes. All right, so create the up and down methods for code first, specifically for identity. Now let's go ahead and do update database to get that saved. Once again, take a look at your app settings JSON. Make sure you're satisfied with that connection string. We'll do update database. And specify the context, which we said, probably still in the clipboard, identity context. And now we can go back to SQL Server and we can refresh. And it did not create a new database. That's a good sign. If I come into the Northwind tables, you could see that it's added the ASP.NET users tables to the same database as where I have my customers and employees and so forth. What I've seen some folks do is they'll have their application data use a different schema. So instead of DBO, maybe it's report or app, or maybe DataVids if you want to be really cool, dot customers, dot employees. Just come out here in SQL Server and you just type create schema, blah, blah, blah. And then you put your tables in that schema. That'll help you keep them separated. But this works just fine. Keep them all together since they all start with the same words for now. All right, so even though we scaffolded everything, it didn't actually change like the home page or anything like that, like it would if you were to create a new project and pick individual accounts. So there may be a couple of things that you might want to copy and paste from that project template. I did that, but not to the extreme. I'll show you. So if you go to like the privacy page, I'm sorry, the home page index, you're going to want to add their template for logging in and logging out. So the index page loads from, puts information in around the template. So the template is going to be layout, which is in shared. Here it is. If we go down to the bottom of layout, there's these list items here that build up the nav bar across the top of the screen. So in here, you're going to add this partial view. And it's not a view that you need to create. It came when you scaffolded identity, so you have it available to you. I'm going to go ahead and run this now just to show you what that looks like. So as you can see, the login showed up there. So I can click on login. And yeah, I probably don't have an account, so let's register real quick first. And register. And if you're interested in me putting together a SendGrid video, I could do that. But there's all kinds of different ways of hooking up email. SendGrid seems to be the one that Microsoft's been pushing lately, or perhaps for a really long time. But there are other ways to do it. So anyways, they have a little hack here for you until you hook up email for confirming accounts. You just click that and it updates it in the database. So if I was to come out here and I was to right click on ASP.NET users and see there's the account I put in, and if you go, there should be a Boolean email confirmed right here. So it says true. So because the email is confirmed, I should be able to now log in. So let's go to log in, whatever email you used. See if you remember your password. Hey, I'm logged in. So now I see this privacy page here. We're going to put some custom information from the database and have it show up here only if you're logged in, just to show you how that works. Because that's kind of like what identity is all about, right? And we can do stuff with roles if we want to get deeper into it, or claims, which let's stop running it first. So if you go out to pages, privacies here, and the code behind for privacy is here. These are Razor pages. If you're doing MVC, then obviously we're going to have to put some stuff in a model as well, but it is like so similar that you could probably follow this video and still figure it out. All right, so in here we're going to need to get access to the database and all that, but first, why don't we say that this is going to have the authorize attribute. So put authorize like that. You can control dot and say I want to use ASP.NET Core.authorization. Now everything in this controller requires you to be logged in unless you do something like allow anonymous. But we're not going to do that because there's just one method here. It's on get right now. The next thing you're probably going to want to do is you want to have a service for accessing the database. Because we're using identity, you can use the user manager. You can inject that out here in program.cs, or you could create your own data manager, which I'm going to do because I want to use more than just a built-in get role, get user kind of thing. But we could do that too. So why don't we go ahead and start with our custom service, because that's the most exciting first. So down here on builder.services, that's where you add your services in .NET 6. I'm going to do it right after I add identity, which make this full screen. It kind of like slop things around to the semicolon here. I don't know why the template did that. They're probably still working on it, but you can bring it down to make it a little bit easier to read. Not a big deal. Okay, so I like to do it, so let's do it right here, right after identity. They kind of give you a hint to do it here. So we'll do builder.services.add transient to add transient service. And in here, we'll call it our iData service for interface, and then data service. Now we got to create those files. So if you control dot on the first one, you could like create it in a new file. I stopped doing that just because then I don't get to pick where it goes. So what you could do is either concrete and implement it, or abstract and actual, or whatever, or you could just create a folder called services and be less fancy about it. That's what I'm going to do. So we'll call the first one data services, add class data service, change that to be interface. We'll come back here in a minute. Now we'll do add class data service, and that's going to be implementing the iData service. And let's go ahead, and actually it's giving you a good idea here. We don't really want that, but I hit tab to use the suggestion to get the private read only, because we're going to bring in our database context here. But for right now, let's go to program.cs and add the references. So control dot using identity services. There you go. Go back into data service. So in here, we're going to actually put the context. I think I might have alluded to that a little bit ago. So the context we want is going to be the north wind one. In fact, we're going to change everything to be that. So we can come out here and change all these accordingly. So if you go to, let's see, where did we put it? Pages, shared, no, models, north wind context, bingo. We'll put that into the clipboard, because that's our top level context, right? It inherits from the other one, add stuff to it. Go back to program CS. We're going to change all these contexts to be north wind context. And we'll control dot on that using identity models. Wonderful. Let's go back into data service. And here, we're going to take a north wind context, and we'll call it context. How's that sound? Once again, control dot. Oops, I did control comma. I don't know what that does. Control dot using the models. Excellent. Now we need a constructor. So public data service. Remember, constructor is always the same name as class, but you already knew that. So in here, we're going to bring in another north wind context, and it's coming in here. It's being injected by the program itself, and we'll call it context. And we could say context. Hey, look at that, Visual Studio suggested we do that. We're assigning the parameter context to the property context, or the private context there. Now we have it available to be used. So next, let's create our actual data method to get data out. Now there's a field in here called customers, or a table, and it has some really good data that we could use. So why don't we do a public list of type customer, and we'll call it get customers, and maybe. So in here, we could have customers is equal to context. Let's get out of our database, customers. Then add a new line, we could do where the country, look at that, Visual Studio is so smart. Country is equal to country. I didn't even type that, I just hit tab. Now, we wanted to get an example where, hey, maybe we only do this if we've got something out of the users table. Because the whole point of not having two contexts is to where maybe you would like to utilize both the users, or the login context, and this context in one context. So you could do something like users is equal to context.users, where maybe you have to be creative here. username, oops, ends with Gmail. How about that? Then you could say if the customer or if the users.any, saying if there were any users with Gmail, then we'll return the customers. Otherwise, well, actually it'd be to list, because we said we want a list here. Otherwise, we'll return null. Or we could return an empty list. How about that? Now we got to put this in our interface. And we might need to get a reference here. And we need to call this from a controller. Since we're doing Razor pages instead of MVC, we'll call it from the Razor page. So I said privacy is where we're going to do it. So here's the Razor page backend. But because it's Razor pages, this is also a model. So why don't we specify here where we're going to put that? We'll do prop tab list of customers. We'll call it my customers. And we'll do control dot here to use the identity models. And down here on get, we are going to access that. Actually, we need to bring in our data service that we just said we're going to use. So private read-only I data service. Lots of namespaces to drag in here, isn't there? Data service. Let's keep consistent with those underscores, folks, if they want that. And then here in the constructor, we'll add I data service. So then just like that, we can bring in data service. And then we have access to it here. So we could say my customers is equal to data service. Already added new on there. Dot get customers. And we wanted a country. Well, I believe the Northwind has lots of users in different countries, but I was going to use Mexico as an example. Beautiful country. Now let's come back over to the view for this. And let's put a for loop here to get all that data out. @ for each var item in, and we're already in the model. So, or I mean, we were just in the model. So model dot my customers. And you can do whatever HTML you want here, something fancy perhaps. In my case, I'm just going to do a div, and I'm going to do html.raw. Item dot say company name or contact name. And let's go ahead and run it. It says there are errors. We missed a bracket. Run it. So if I click privacy, before it would just take me to that screen, but now it requires you to be authorized. So it noticed you weren't logged in, it took you here. I'm logging in. Get that error, you just got to go to your context. I missed a step. Go to areas, identity. Here's your identity context. We're looking for on model creating. As you can see, it has this base.onModel creating builder. This needs to be in our other context too. So we can go to models Northwind context and find the on model creating here. Here it is here, and just add it as a first line. Also, since we're in here, there's a connection string it's shoved in here from when we did our generation. We're applying this in the program.cs, so we don't need this anymore. So go ahead and delete that just to get that connection string out of here. Let's go ahead and run it again. We'll go to privacy. Go ahead and log in. And there you go. It was able to pull down each of those contacts for each of the companies if there is a user or each of those contacts for each of the companies in Mexico if there's a user with Gmail in the system. Otherwise, this would have been blank. Let's see what it's like to add another table. There's some Visual Studio add-ons where you could just simply right-click, add a new item, but I don't believe they come from Microsoft. So the way I know how to do it, the official way so far that I know of, and if you know of a better way, please do put it in the comments. Let's go down to the Package Manager console, and if we just kind of hit the up arrow till we get to where we first built out our database models, not the migration initial, that was for creating the database from the code. Keep going up to where we did scaffold, and we can rescaffold. The downside to that is it's also going to create updates or try to rebuild potentially some of the identity tables. But let's do it anyway. One thing you'll want to do first is check your code into source control so you can see what it changes. Back to SQL Server Management Studio and add your new table that you want. Sometimes it's really easy just to right click on a table, do script as, create to new query window, so you don't have to start from scratch. So let's say you want to say good employees, and let's say you have good employee ID, but you also have first and last name, or maybe you just have a link to the employees table. I'm not going to get too fancy with this because I just wanted to show you how to add a new table, so I'm not even going to add any foreign keys or anything. Just know that the steps are basically the same. So I'm going to come down here. Let's keep the primary key at least, because Entity Framework really likes primary keys. And all the rest of this can be deleted. Don't need that, or it should be, how about primary key good employees? Try F5 again. There we go. Go back to Visual Studio. As you can see down there in the bottom right, I did it kind of off the video, but I added this to my GitHub. If you guys are interested in GitHub videos, I could do that for you. I didn't want to bore everybody else, so just let me know if you think I should make that. But the reason why I wanted to make sure this was in Git first is so that I could see Git track changes here when I do this. So go back to your Package Manager console, and we're going to do the same thing as before. Everything's exactly the same as before. So you just hit the down arrow till the command shows up, but you're going to add -force to the end. It's going to regenerate the models. Press enter. All right. As you can see, it added the new one. That's what we really want, good employee. And unless you've made changes to the database structure of the identity tables, which you probably didn't, we don't want to make those ones replaced. You can right click them and delete. And then go into, you could look at the new employee, but you're not going to do anything with that. So go into the Northwind context here, and let's see what changes it made. And I apologize, but I have to shrink it down a bit so that I can see it too for this task here. But it looks like it wants to kind of undo all the fancy footwork we did here. So just look through and see if there's anything new you want, because most likely just taking that new table is enough. And you're going to find right here, and we can copy that into the clipboard, all the stuff we removed earlier is there, see? And instructions on how to build the ASP.NET tables, and instructions on how to build the good employee table. So we'll keep that as well. So what I'll do is just put it in Notepad. And if you guys have a better way of doing this, by all means share it with the other viewers. All right. Now we can undo changes to this one, since it's going to be quicker to put those two things in than it is to undo everything. And we'll go back to the Northwind context, and we'll drop them in here. All right. The DB set, doesn't matter where you put it, just drop it in there. The next thing you got is the model builder entity. Let's go down to where the other ones are. Model builder entity. We'll drop it in here. Now we should be able to build. And let's just see if we can utilize that new table. Good employee. Hit G here. There it is there. So if I was to go to, we were working in the privacy page. If I was to say every time someone accesses this get, we're going to insert a good employee, we could do that. So services, here's the method here. So let's say whenever we were successfully able to return countries, we'll add a good employee. I know that might not be really logical, but that's what we're doing. Good employees dot add. We could do new good employee, control space, with the first name equal to maybe the logged in user or something, or maybe we'll just have it always be a John Doe. Last name this is just to show that we could actually use the new table. Now the type on the employee ID, I didn't really pay attention to that. Let's see. Employee ID is an integer. So we're adding that new one, and then we still have to save the changes. Save changes. Let's give it a shot. So still has the cookie from being logged in earlier. It didn't like it. Identity. Identity insert. So it's an auto ID. So what we could do here is just let it pick the ID, which is going to be 1, 2, 3, 4 as it builds it out, because it's an identity. Privacy. Let's do it 3 times. 1, 2, 3. Now let's go to the database And let's refresh the tables. And let's go to good employee and we'll select 1, 2, 3, John Doe's. So as you can see, you could still add new tables even though we're doing database first. It's a little bit messy with those identity contexts in there. There may be another way out there, or what I really think you should probably do is do all the steps that I showed you, but find the correct plugin for adding new tables. I've seen it out there, and if I find it again, I'll add it in the comments to this video and pin it so that you guys know what to do to save you a little bit of time when adding new tables. Well, I hope this was educational for you, and if you followed me all the way to the end, great job, and have a great day. Bye.